Music pulsed through the evening air, bass notes vibrating through my chest as string lights cast dancing shadows across the crowded backyard. But I barely registered any of it. My attention had narrowed to a single point across the lawn, where he stood beneath the warm glow of hanging lanterns. Ethan, my best friend Rachel's older brother, dressed in a fitted charcoal shirt that caught the light just so. His eyes found mine through the chaos of the party, and I felt pinned in place, unable to look away. He moved through the crowd toward me, and I caught the scent of cedar and spice cutting through the smoke from the grill and the outdoor fire pit. When he reached me, he leaned close enough that I could hear him clearly over the noise, his voice low and weighted with something I couldn't quite name. "You're the reason I came tonight." The words hit me like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs. Let me take you back, so you understand why those 6 words felt like they carried the weight of the world. Ethan was 5 years older than Rachel and me. The person everyone noticed when he walked into a room, even without trying. Confident in a way that seemed effortless, with a smile that could light up the darkest spaces. He'd left for university, while Rachel and I were still navigating the confusion of our teenage years, trying to figure out who we were supposed to become. But standing there under those party lights, he wasn't the Ethan I remembered. The easy confidence had faded. His eyes looked tired, carrying the kind of exhaustion that comes from crying when no one's watching. I hadn't seen him in years, not since that terrible afternoon when everything fell apart. The afternoon Rachel's family packed up and left town, carrying secrets none of us wanted to speak about. I could still see it so clearly in my mind. The wail of sirens cutting through the quiet neighborhood, the harsh glare of emergency lights painting their house in red and blue. The way Rachel collapsed when she heard the news. It was the day Ethan's world shattered into pieces too small to put back together. The day his father died in an accident that haunted me because I was the one responsible. I was only 18 then, reckless and desperate to prove I was capable, mature, worthy of being taken seriously. Ethan's father had organized a community cleanup event and needed volunteers. I'd offered to drive, hoping to impress Ethan, who'd mentioned his dad could use extra help. His father had always been kind to me, treating me like I belonged. But on that rain-soaked road, with water streaming down the windshield and my judgment clouded by overconfidence and inexperience, a single moment changed everything. A car swerved. I overcorrected. The crash that followed took a life. The guilt that settled over me afterward felt like drowning in slow motion. Rachel never said she blamed me outright, but I could feel it in the spaces between our words, in the way our once solid friendship began to fray and unravel. And Ethan simply disappeared. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd moved abroad, rebuilding his life somewhere far from the memories and the loss. Who could blame him? So when he said, "You're the reason I came tonight," something cold and sharp twisted through my chest. For years, I'd rehearsed what I would say if I ever saw him again. Apologies scripted and re-scripted in my mind, begging for forgiveness I knew I didn't deserve. But when I looked at his face, I didn't see anger. I saw something deeper, something more complicated. The party continued around us. People laughing, dancing, bottles clinking together in toasts. But we stood there by the fence, wrapped in our shared history, existing in a bubble separate from everything else. I tried to find words, any words, but my throat felt tight and my mind went blank. He looked at me like he was seeing a ghost. Finally, he spoke again. "I almost didn't come. Rachel told me you'd be here. She thought it might help me find some kind of closure. Help him face the person who destroyed his family." The thought made my stomach twist. "I'm not here to blame you," he continued, his voice catching slightly. "I'm here because I need to understand why you disappeared completely, why you never reached out, not even once." That struck deeper than any accusation could have. He was right. I hadn't tried to contact them. Guilt had paralyzed me. I'd convinced myself that staying away was the respectful thing to do, that my absence was a form of penance they deserved. But facing him now, seeing the raw pain still visible in his features, I understood that my silence had only made things worse. "Ethan," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper, "I'm so deeply sorry, for everything, for hiding, for being too afraid to face what I'd done." He stood there, studying me for what felt like an eternity. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. It showed all of us together, me, Rachel, their father, and Ethan, smiling at the cleanup site just hours before the tragedy. Everyone so alive, so unaware of what was coming. He pressed the photo into my hand. "He always said you reminded him of himself when he was younger," Ethan said quietly. "Adventurous, well-meaning, he never blamed you. You know that, don't you?" My hands trembled around the photograph. Tears I'd been holding back for years broke free. "I don't deserve that kind of grace," I choked out. "Maybe not," he replied gently. "But grace isn't something you earn. It's given to people who need it most, whether they deserve it or not." For the first time in years, I let myself cry openly, the sobs coming from somewhere deep and raw inside me. He stayed there, solid and steady. And then he did something I never expected. He stepped forward and pulled me into a brief, awkward, but genuine embrace. It was fragile, uncertain, but it felt like light breaking through after years of darkness. Part 2, the long road back. Life didn't magically fix itself after that night. Rachel kept her distance at first, and I understood why. Some wounds need time to heal properly, layer by layer. But Ethan stayed in touch. A text message here, a coffee meeting there. He told me about his life abroad, his work, the therapy sessions that had helped him process his grief, the slow journey toward feeling whole again. He said that talking about his father out loud, sharing memories instead of burying them, brought unexpected relief. And somehow, our conversations became part of that healing process for him. For me, he represented something I'd stopped believing in, the possibility of redemption. Not the dramatic, instant kind you see in movies, but the quiet, patient kind that happens through understanding and forgiveness, one conversation at a time. Weeks turned into months. Then one autumn morning, my phone rang. Rachel's name appeared on the screen, and I almost didn't answer, my heart hammering with anxiety. When I did pick up, her voice carried a warmth I hadn't heard in years. She'd talked to Ethan, heard the full story of our reconnection, how he'd chosen to let go of the anger and pain. And maybe, she said carefully, it was time for her to do the same. She invited me to a small gathering at their place. I hesitated, old fears bubbling up immediately, but then I remembered Ethan's words, "Grace isn't earned." That afternoon, when Rachel opened the gate, she paused, looked at me steadily, and then pulled me into a tight hug. No speeches, no explanations, just that simple gesture that said everything words couldn't. From that moment forward, the crushing weight I'd carried began to lift. Little by little, I started reclaiming pieces of myself I'd lost. Part 3, Understanding and Growth. The months that followed brought unexpected changes. Rachel and I rebuilt our friendship slowly, carefully, learning to trust each other again. It wasn't the same as before. We were different people now, shaped by loss and time, but in some ways our connection felt deeper, more honest. Ethan became a regular part of my life again, though in a different capacity than I'd ever imagined. We'd meet for lunch sometimes, talking about everything and nothing. He told me about his work in graphic design, how he'd channeled his grief into creating things that brought beauty into the world. I told him about my own journey, the therapy I'd finally started, the ways I was learning to forgive myself without forgetting what had happened. One afternoon, we sat in a quiet coffee shop, rain pattering against the windows. Ethan stirred his drink thoughtfully before looking up at me. "Can I tell you something?" he asked. I nodded, suddenly nervous. "That night at the party, when I said you were the reason I came, I meant it in a way I couldn't fully explain then. I needed to see you as a real person again, not as the villain I'd built up in my mind during the worst of my grief." Rachel thought it would help me, but honestly, I wasn't sure. I was terrified I'd see you, and all that anger would come rushing back. "What happened instead?" I asked quietly. He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. I saw someone carrying the same weight I was, someone who'd been punishing themselves far more severely than I ever could, and I realized that holding onto that anger was keeping both of us trapped in that terrible day. I couldn't change what happened, but I could choose what came next. I felt tears prickling my eyes again. "I don't know how you did it, how you found the strength to forgive." "Forgiveness isn't about strength," he said thoughtfully. "It's about exhaustion. I was so tired of being angry, so tired of letting that one day define everything. My therapist helped me understand that forgiveness doesn't mean saying what happened was okay. It means deciding that what happened doesn't get to control the rest of my life. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand briefly. And honestly, you apologizing, truly taking responsibility without making excuses, that mattered more than you know. Most people can't do that. They minimize or deflect. But you looked at what you'd done and owned it. That took courage. It didn't feel courageous, I admitted. It felt like the bare minimum. Maybe, he said, but the bare minimum is still something. It's a starting point. Part 4, Full Circle. 2 years after that first conversation at the party, Rachel hosted another gathering in the same backyard. The string lights were the same, the music still pulsed through the air, but everything felt different now. I stood near the fire pit, watching people laugh and dance, and realized I could finally breathe freely. The guilt was still there in small measure, but it no longer consumed me. I'd learned to carry it differently, as a reminder rather than a prison. Ethan appeared beside me, that same charcoal shirt fitting comfortably now, the shadows gone from his eyes, replaced with something peaceful. "Remember what I said that first night?" he asked, looking up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "That I was why you came," I replied. He nodded. I meant it, not as an accusation, but as a truth. I came because I needed to face you to find my own closure, and because I needed to help you find yours. In that moment, something clicked into place. The people we hurt most deeply can sometimes become our greatest teachers about empathy, mercy, and healing. Not because pain is good, but because working through it together creates understanding that runs deeper than words. "Thank you," I said simply, "for not giving up on the possibility that people can change, that things can get better." He smiled. "We don't get to choose what happens to us, but we do get to choose what we do with it. That's the only real power any of us have." Rachel joined us then, slipping her arm through mine in an easy, familiar gesture that made my heart swell. She raised her glass in a quiet toast. "To moving forward," she said. "To moving forward," Ethan and I echoed. Part 5, Lessons Learned. In the years since that transformative evening, I've thought a lot about what happened. About guilt and grace, about punishment and redemption, about the unexpected ways healing can arrive. I learned that running from your mistakes doesn't protect anyone. It just creates more pain, more distance, more silence where connection should be. I learned that taking responsibility means more than just saying sorry. It means sitting with the discomfort of what you've done, listening to how you've impacted others, and doing the hard work of becoming someone who won't make the same choices again. I learned that forgiveness is complicated. It's not a single moment or decision. It's a process that unfolds over time, with setbacks and breakthroughs. And sometimes, the person you need to forgive most is yourself. But most importantly, I learned that people are capable of extraordinary grace. Ethan didn't have to reach out. Rachel didn't have to open her door. They chose to, despite the pain, despite the history. They chose to see me as more than the worst thing I'd ever done. That choice changed everything. I still carry the photograph Ethan gave me that night. It sits on my desk, a reminder of what was lost, but also what was found. The man in that photo, Ethan's father, was someone who believed in second chances and saw the good in people even when they struggled to see it in themselves. I try to honor his memory by extending that same grace to others. When someone makes a mistake, when they're drowning in guilt and shame, I remember how it felt to be pulled back from that edge. I remember that punishment and isolation rarely lead to growth, but accountability combined with compassion can transform everything. Part 6, The Gift of Time. 5 years after the accident, I attended Ethan's wedding. Standing in that beautiful outdoor venue, watching him exchange vows with someone he loved, I felt the last pieces of grief and guilt settle into their proper place. During the reception, he found me at my table and pulled up a chair. "I'm glad you came," he said warmly. "I wouldn't have missed it," I replied honestly. "Thank you for inviting me." He was quiet for a moment, watching the dance floor where Rachel was spinning with her partner, both of them laughing freely. "You know what helped me the most?" he asked suddenly, "through all of this?" I shook my head. "Time," he said simply. Not because time heals all wounds, that's not really true, but because time gives you space to see things from different angles. Right after Dad died, all I could see was the loss, the unfairness, the anger, but time let me start seeing other things too. The good years we had, the lessons he taught me, the way he lived his life with kindness and generosity. He looked at me directly. And time let me see you differently too. Not as the person who caused the accident, but as someone who's worked incredibly hard to grow from a terrible mistake. Someone who's dedicated themselves to being better, to helping others, to making sure something good comes from something tragic. I felt my throat tighten with emotion. I don't know if I've done enough. That's the thing, he said gently. There is no enough. You can't balance the scales or undo what happened. You can only keep moving forward, keep choosing growth and compassion, keep showing up as the best version of yourself. That's all any of us can do. Rachel appeared then, slightly breathless from dancing, and pulled us both into a group hug. What are we being so serious about? She asked teasingly. Just talking about how far we've all come, Ethan said, smiling at both of us. Rachel squeezed us tighter. Pretty damn far, I'd say. Epilogue, full circle. Now, when I think about that night at the party, the moment Ethan said I was the reason he came, I understand it completely differently than I did then. I thought he was there to confront me, to finally express all the anger and pain I deserved. But he was actually there to free both of us, to show me that the story didn't have to end with guilt and isolation, that there was another path available if we were both brave enough to take it. The work of healing isn't dramatic or quick. It happens in small moments. A text message checking in, a shared cup of coffee, an honest conversation about hard things, a photograph pressed into trembling hands, an embrace that says more than words ever could. It happens when someone looks at you and sees not just your worst moment but your whole self, your capacity for growth, your genuine remorse, your efforts to be better. And it happens when you learn to look at yourself with that same compassionate complexity. I still think about Ethan's father often, about the community cleanup that never got finished, about the kindness he showed me when I was just an awkward teenager trying to find my place in the world. I think about how he believed in second chances and the fundamental goodness of people. I carry that belief forward now into every interaction, every relationship, every moment when someone stumbles and needs a hand back up. Because I know, deeply and personally, what it means to receive grace you don't deserve. And I know how that grace can transform not just a moment, but an entire life. The shadows that fell across my path that terrible day didn't disappear, but they lifted enough to let light back in, enough to let me see clearly again, enough to let me walk forward into a future I once thought I'd forfeited forever. And in those small, sacred moments, when someone trusts me with their own mistakes and struggles, I get to pass forward the gift I was given. The understanding that our worst moments don't have to define us, that growth is always possible, and that sometimes the people we've hurt most deeply can become the very ones who show us the way home. That's what Ethan gave me that night under the party lights. Not absolution exactly, but something better, a path forward. A reminder that life continues, that healing happens, and that redemption isn't a destination but a direction.